Adam woke up in a comfortable bed, reached out his hand, and felt Nora's warmth next to him. Once upon a time, it was the best feeling in the world to cuddle up to your beloved wife and hear her even breathing. But recently something has changed. It seemed as if an invisible wall stood between them. He got up, put on his robe, and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Once upon a time, Nora loved to surprise him with dishes, either new recipes or family tricks that her grandmother passed on to her. Now the pans and pots were mostly untouched. Nora rarely appeared in the kitchen except to drink coffee. 15 minutes later, Adam set the table and called his wife. Nora appeared in the doorway, stretched tiredly, and smiled automatically when she saw the plates of food. "Thank you," she said curtly, looking at her phone. Previously, her gaze was full of tenderness, but now there was detachment in her eyes. Nora was once bright, cheerful, always ready to experiment in bed and take spontaneous trips. Now Adam increasingly noticed that she was withdrawing into herself. She spent an incredible amount of time on the phone. Sometimes it seemed as if she lived there and not next to her husband. Adam sighed softly. He didn't want quarrels, didn't want to put pressure on his wife. Maybe she's just going through a rough patch, maybe she's tired, but my heart ached from the feeling that everything was not so simple. After breakfast, Adam went to the office. He was involved in real estate and was a manager in a large company. Workdays were usually stressful, but Adam liked to maintain contact with people, make deals, and feel the dynamics of the city. Nora, in turn, worked remotely in recent months. She almost never left the house. She said it was more convenient and calmer this way. Adam noticed that despite the word calmer, irritability was increasingly visible in her behavior. Any little thing, any insignificant request could set her off. In the evening, returning from work, Adam found his wife in the living room. The TV was turned off, but the laptop and phone were lying next to her. Judging by her tired face, she clearly spent the whole day on gadgets. On the table, there was a cup of already cooled coffee and a mountain of paper, which Nora never touched. "How was your day?" Adam asked, trying to add as much warmth to his voice as possible. "Fine," Nora answered dryly, without even raising her eyes. At some point, Adam felt irritation arise in his chest. He wanted her to show at least a little interest, to ask how he was, what was new with him. But he swallowed this feeling. "I chalked it up to stress and fatigue." Once upon a time, their evenings were filled with passion. They could cuddle in bed for hours, chat, make plans for the future. But now, when it was time to go to bed, Nora cited fatigue. She turned to the wall, quickly said goodbye, and almost immediately fell asleep or pretended to fall asleep. Adam lay awake for a long time, looking at the ceiling. "She probably has depression or some kind of hidden stress," he thought. "Or she was just tired of the monotony. Maybe we should surprise her, let him unwind and rejoice." But even in these thoughts, an unpleasant feeling haunted me. Intuition whispered that everything was more complicated, that in her indifference there is something alien, unfamiliar. However, he brushed aside these thoughts, not wanting to believe in the bad. The next day, Adam got up earlier than usual and did not find Nora nearby. He walked through the house and saw her in the kitchen, but not preparing breakfast. She was nervously typing something on her phone, biting her lip. Hearing Adam's footsteps, Nora hurriedly blocked the screen and pretended to make tea. "You got up earlier today," she said, trying not to meet his gaze. "Yes, I wanted to come to the office early. We have a check there." He tried to smile, but felt strangely awkward. Her coldness, endless phone calls, and constant irritation began to become unbearable. It was as if a ghostly guest had appeared in the house, taking the place of the former cheerful and kind Nora. However, Adam still hoped that this was temporary. I hoped that they could talk and return to their former closeness. Indeed, in the past, their love defeated much more difficult circumstances, for example, the very accident that brought them together. Past memories of a reverent acquaintance each time reminded Adam how much they had experienced together. He reassured himself that crises in relationships were not uncommon, and they would overcome this one too, and yet at times he felt afraid. Adam remembered their unusual first meeting. He stood in the cold rain, holding a huge bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands. His heart sank with guilt. Just a few days ago, while driving distracted, he did something that he still couldn't think about without trembling in his chest. He hit a pedestrian. This pedestrian turned out to be Nora, a girl whose eyes he now remembered every minute. She was now in the hospital, and Adam felt like it was his duty to be there to help her recover and atone for his own carelessness. The sound of raindrops hitting the glass of the hospital hall sounded like a reproach. He imagined that this sound was her moan or cry of pain. Damn, if I hadn't reached for the phone then. He replayed in his mind a thought that haunted him. The guard nodded tiredly at him as he walked past towards the elevator. Adam had been here more often in recent days than anywhere else. He carried the flowers through the long corridor and finally reached the room where Nora lay. When he looked into the room for the first time, Nora's gaze was frightened and incredulous. Her head was bandaged, and there was a large scratch on her face. Her arm was in a cast. Her rib was cracked. The doctors said it was fortunate that she got off relatively lightly. "Hello, Nora," he said quietly, entering and trying to speak in a calm, warm voice. "You are the same driver, right?" Nora looked at him carefully. There was pain in her eyes, but at the same time curiosity. "Yes, sorry, Adam stopped, not knowing what to add. All his words seemed like pathetic excuses. He placed the bouquet on the bedside table and sat down on the chair next to him. "I know that I am to blame, and that this does not compensate for your pain, but I want to help. I want to pay for all the costs of treatment, medications, and care." He spoke quietly but decisively. "Adam." In Nora's tired voice, there was some kind of soft intonation, as if she saw how he was tormented by guilt. "Okay, thank you." Since then, Adam has come to her every day. He brought boxes of fruit, freshly squeezed juices, and vitamins that doctors recommended. He bought new pillows, warm blankets, everything to make her more comfortable. It seemed as if he was trying to make amends through constant concern. Sometimes they talked. First about trifles, about the weather, news, films. Then Adam began to tell her about his life, about how his father got divorced when he was still a child, and about the difficulties that he himself experienced. Nora, listening to his stories, gradually relaxed and shunned less and less. She suddenly realized that this man was not just the culprit of the accident, but a person who himself suffered from the mistakes of others and tried not to repeat them. With each new meeting, Nora noticed how an unusual feeling grew in her soul. First simple human curiosity, and then sympathy. Adam was sincerely devoted to her, ready to help at any moment. Sometimes at night, when she woke up in pain, she found him dozing on a chair next to the bed. He might come straight from a meeting or a late business trip just to make sure she was okay. Despite the terrible start, this unfortunate accident, something much more than just patient and culprit arose between them. "You don't have to take such care of me," Nora once said, turning to the window to hide her slight blush. "Doctors are already saying that I'm better, and insurance will cover part of the costs." "I want to," Adam answered, peering into her haggard face. "I want to make sure that everything will really be okay with you." He noticed how Nora often bit her lip when she was nervous or shy. This gesture caused a quivering warmth to appear in Adam's chest. He no longer just paid for her treatment and brought food. He felt that he had an obligation to take care of her. Take care of her smile, lift her spirits, tell funny stories to distract her from the pain. A few weeks later, when Nora was discharged, Adam offered to take her home. She was still in a cast and had difficulty moving. Her apartment was on the second floor of an old building without an elevator, so every ascent and descent was agony. "Maybe I can carry you in my arms," he suggested half-jokingly, seeing how hard it was for her. "You're kidding me," Nora snorted and smiled, but somehow confused. "I'm still not 5 years old." But Adam wasn't joking. He grabbed her by the knees and carefully carried her up. Nora grabbed him by the neck, and at that moment electric tension arose between them. Their gazes crossed, Nora's heart began to beat faster, and Adam's insides were turning over at the touch of her hands. Leaving Nora at home, he did not leave immediately, but helped her lie down and prepared tea. They talked about all sorts of trifles, laughed at old films. After the hospital walls in the apartment, she felt uneasy, but Adam's presence gave her confidence. At some point, a timid intimacy arose between them. Their fingers accidentally touched, and neither of them removed their hand. Adam didn't leave that night. He took the chair opposite the sofa where Nora was lying. It seemed wrong to him to leave her alone in this state. Nora closed her eyes and sleep overcame her a few minutes later, but not before she felt Adam straighten the blanket and gently run his fingers through her hair. She smiled in her sleep. This was followed by weeks of rehabilitation therapy and regular visits to the doctor. Adam took her to procedures, bought medicine, prepared broths, and brought funny books or magazines so that Nora wouldn't get bored. It seemed that this man was ready to move mountains just to feel her graceful gaze. And over time, gratitude grew into something more. Nora noticed that she was looking at Adam with a warmth that she had not felt for anyone for a long time. She could not believe that such a terrible situation brought them together, but she saw that it was on these days that the true essence of a person was revealed. And Adam turned out to be not at all the monster that she, in a fit of despair, called him in the first 24 hours after the accident. He turned out to be caring, selfless, and, to her surprise, she began to feel something more for him than just sympathy for the Savior. One evening, when he brought her home again after another procedure, Nora suddenly snuggled up to him, hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder. She didn't say anything, but Adam felt her shake with quiet crying. It hurt him so much to see her tears that he impulsively hugged her tighter and began stroking her hair. At that moment, their hearts beat in unison, and the silence spoke more than any words. Later, when Nora fully recovered, they began dating as a couple. Adam took her to a cafe, tinkered with her kitten, which she had gotten before the accident, gave her flowers, and showed her in every possible way that he was always ready to take care of her, not only in times of trouble. It was then that he decided to confess his feelings to her. They overcame many difficulties, and marriage seemed a logical continuation of this story of salvation and love. Who would have thought that, years later, the same coldness that settled in Nora's soul would appear between them and begin to destroy everything that they had so carefully built? Adam woke up in the middle of the night with vague anxiety. He listened to the even breathing of Nora, whom he could barely make out in the darkness. Everything seemed normal, but inside he seemed to be tormented by some hidden fear. Over the past few days, Nora has been acting increasingly distant. She sat on the phone for a long time and kept sneaking out of the house in the evenings. At times he tried to joke and asked where she was going, but Nora answered with excuses. Work, a colleague called me to sit down. We need to settle things each time there was a new reason. It seemed that Nora began to disappear from the office almost around the clock. Previously, her work schedule was quite predictable. Freelancing, remote orders, this allowed her to be at home, relax, and meet Adam from work. Now she constantly received some kind of urgent messages and left to resolve issues without giving clear explanations. "Are you in a meeting again?" Adam asked, noticing that Nora was intensively writing a message to someone. "Yes, we are in the midst of a project. There is a lot of work," she answered dryly, without taking her eyes off the screen. Adam felt growing anxiety. After all, before they always shared any little things with each other, they discussed the most trivial events. Now there was a feeling that he was not only not at the center of her life, he was not at all aware of what was happening. At the same time, Nora became hot-tempered in everyday interactions. The slightest questions about her plans or requests about the house made her irritated. When Adam wanted to cook dinner together in the evening, Nora refused, citing fatigue. He offered to go to a restaurant, but she sharply refused. "I don't have the strength or mood. If you want, go alone." Sometimes he noticed how she animatedly corresponded in the messenger, sometimes giggling, looking at the screen. But as soon as he came closer, she immediately turned away or even left the room under the pretext of going out onto the balcony. Adam was starting to doubt whether he should ask her directly what was going on. But every time he was afraid of running into another outburst of anger or reproach. They say he controls her too much. He tried not to escalate the situation and hoped that she would come and share when the storm subsided. Adam was especially worried about her frequent walks in the evenings. Previously, Nora almost didn't like nightlife. They themselves rarely went anywhere later than 11. Now she could easily say that she was leaving to have coffee with a friend or have a business meeting and return a few hours later. Sometimes, when Adam was already falling asleep, he heard the door quietly open and Nora tiptoeing into the bedroom. "What kind of things do you decide at night?" He couldn't restrain himself once she returned, especially late. "Lord, there is no crime," Nora sighed tiredly and slid past to undress. Work, communication with partners, then the girls called for a glass of wine. She said this so casually, as if nothing strange had happened, but Adam could not help but think that this had never happened before. Previously, Nora talked about every meeting and shared the details of the conversations. Now she has become more and more withdrawn. One evening, when Nora left on yet another unclear errand, Adam tiredly sank onto the sofa in the living room, staring at the turned-off TV. It was hard for him to admit, but somewhere in the back of his mind, there was already a gloomy thought about betrayal. He drove her away with all his might. No, it can't be. It's just stress, projects, nerves. But the facts spoke for themselves. Nora increasingly looked content and happy precisely after her disappearances. At home, on the contrary, she was gloomy and irritable. Why is she leaving? Who is she dating? Why does he keep excluding me from his life? For the first time since the beginning of their life together, Adam felt as if there was a strange woman next to him. She spoke dryly, her eyes wandered somewhere to the side, and her touches were reduced to formal hugs. Adam tried several times to engage Nora in a conversation about family plans. He offered to arrange a vacation, maybe together at the seaside, or at least go to the mountains for the weekend, as they did before. Nora waved it off. "There's too much to do now, let's do it later." At the mention of children, Nora's frown deepened. That's not being discussed anytime soon. Previously, they dreamed of a big family, but now she seemed not to want to hear about it. At night, lying in bed, Adam tried to remember exactly when everything went wrong. I remembered the last few months, her frequent business trips and some dinners with friends, which she talked about superficially. He couldn't understand whether she really had a lot of new projects, or anxiety grew like a snowball, and the most painful thing was the thought that this discord could turn out to be not just stress or a relationship crisis, but something much more dangerous for their marriage. Several times Adam even wanted to check her phone, but he did not dare. It would seem like a low act, and Nora would be furious. But she couldn't get rid of the feeling that she was keeping some secret. Perhaps he would have continued to be tormented by guesses for a long time if fate had not given him a surprise. By chance or naturally, Adam will see something that will make his doubts turn into anger and decisive action. But he did not yet know how close this discovery was. Adam ran through the pouring rain to the car, cursing at the weather and at fate, which was giving him more and more reasons to worry. It was about 8 in the evening, the moment when the city was just beginning to fill with the lights of storefronts and the buzz of nightlife. He planned to quickly transfer from the office to the car and drive home to finally have dinner with Nora. But then a work colleague, Kyle, called him over for a few words. They decided to discuss a potential deal, and Adam thought it wouldn't hurt to invite Kyle to a nearby restaurant for a calm conversation without the rush and noise. They chose a discreet but cozy restaurant, La Violetta, known for its Italian dishes. Walking inside and shaking the rain from his jacket, Adam breathed in with relief the warm aroma of pasta, cheese, and freshly baked bread. He glanced quickly around the hall, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat in his chest. At a table in the back of the room he saw Nora, but she was not alone. A man sat with her tall, with a stylish haircut, in an expensive jacket. They were talking animatedly about something, laughing, and, as it seemed to Adam, Their fingers were intertwined on the table. Crap, Adam whispered under his breath, not believing his own eyes. Kyle, carried away by the story of the deal, did not immediately notice that his friend stopped dead in his tracks. When he saw it, he asked in bewilderment, "Is everything okay, Adam?" But Adam could not take his eyes off the woman sitting at that table, from his wife. "Yes. Look, Kyle, let's order takeout and discuss the project in the car. It's too crowded," Adam said on autopilot, not taking his eyes off Nora. As Kyle headed to the counter to order a couple boxes of pasta to go, Adam carefully moved behind a column and peered out so he could see Nora. At that moment, she brushed her hair back and looked at the man opposite with a look that was once reserved only for Adam. Then something happened that Adam had hoped not to see until the very end. Nora leaned towards the man and kissed him on the lips. Holding his hand, she looks into his eyes with obvious adoration. Everything inside Adam seemed to collapse. The heart was beating so loudly that it seemed that its beat could be heard even in the noisy hall of the restaurant. Bitterness rose in his throat, and whether it was resentment, rage, or despair, he could not tell. "It's not true. She can't," rushed through my head, but the picture before my eyes was so real that it left no chance for self-deception. Adam felt blind rage well up within him. He wanted to rush into them, turn over the table, surround this man with three-story mats and shake out his soul, and then demand an explanation from Nora. But at the same time, he understood. If he caused a scandal now, then everything could get out of control. On shaking legs, he took out his phone and turned on the camera. I started filming the video, trying to keep my hand as steady as possible. The recording showed their figures at the table, their smiles, Nora's gaze, her gentle touches on the man's hand, and at the end their kiss. My heart sank with acute pain, but Adam forced himself to continue. "I need proof. I need to know who she's with and how long this has been going on. Am I going crazy and this is just a friendly kiss?" But she kissed him on the lips, damn it. When Kyle returned to him with bags of food, he saw Adam's face and immediately knew something was wrong. Without asking any further questions, he silently nodded towards the exit. Adam followed him, gritting his teeth so as not to lose his temper and cause a wild scene right in the restaurant. "I don't know what's going on, man, but let's get out of here," Kyle suggested quietly. Adam, silently nodding, went out into the rain, which had already ceased to be light and turned into a real downpour. In the depths of his soul, he was grateful to the downpour. The cold drops were slightly sobering, preventing him from falling into hysterics. Inside, the storm raged stronger than outside. On the way to the car, Adam could barely make out the words of Kyle, who was trying to say something about reports and rescheduled meetings. All of Adam's thoughts were occupied by the two figures at the table, Nora's laughter, the sparkle in her eyes, the same as he saw him when they first started dating. "Your mother," he whispered to himself as he got behind the wheel. "Why is she doing this to me?" Kyle realized that now was not the time to ask questions and let Adam go. He only briefly thanked him for his understanding, sat for a few minutes without starting the engine, and then finally drove towards the house. He drove mechanically, on autopilot, without even turning on the music, as if he was afraid that any sound could break him off the chain. Anger was mixed with the acute pain of betrayal, and thousands of questions were already spinning in my head, the main ones of which were, who is this guy, and how long has she been lying to him? When he parked at his house, he sat in complete silence for several seconds, looking into emptiness. There was chaos inside his head, but he understood one thing clearly: we need to find out the whole truth. Stop guessing, stop feeling sorry for yourself. If Nora decides to betray him, if she gives her love to another, he must know all the details. He tightly grasped the phone he had just recorded the video on and exhaled quietly. At that moment, he felt as if he was balancing on the edge of an abyss. But he won't jump into it until he knows how to react and what to do next. After all, there is still a chance that this is all just a ridiculous misunderstanding. Soul-eating nonsense. However, an inner voice said that this was not nonsense. Everything that was happening was too real. I won't make a scene until I see the full picture. I will need helpers. I have to find out everything down to the smallest detail. And then I'll show this bitch how I can hit where it hurts. With that grim determination, Adam finally opened the door and stepped out of the car. Adam nervously paced his living room, replaying the picture from the restaurant in his head for the 100th time. Nora, sitting opposite the stranger, her smile kiss. With each flash of memories, an explosive mixture of pain and rage began to boil inside. He understood that simply tearing and throwing now was a waste of energy. He needs concrete action, and most importantly, evidence. After rummaging through his phone, he found the number of an old friend in his contacts, Joshua Harper, or simpler Josh. Josh had been a police officer many years ago and now worked as a private detective. He knew how to get information from anywhere and was good at observing people. Perhaps this is the only person to whom Adam would entrust everything that is now going on in his soul. Adam pressed the call button. A couple of long beeps and a low, hoarse voice was heard at the other end. "Old man, good to hear from you. Did something happen? Josh, we need to meet." ASAP Adam's voice was too tense not to notice his despair. "Dude, are you in trouble?" "Yes, and quite serious ones. About Nora." Josh used to know Nora superficially. He saw how Adam cared for her when she got into that same accident and was sure that they had an ideal relationship. Hearing this from Adam made him anxious. He suggested meeting at the Black Hawk Bar in half an hour. It was a small bar in a quiet side street, with dim lights, small tables, and an eternally gloomy bartender. An ideal place for a confidential conversation. When Adam walked inside, he immediately saw Josh. He was sitting in the far corner at a table, leaning on the back of a chair and looking at his phone. "Hello, buddy." Adam shook his hand and sat down opposite him. "You look like shit," Josh said bluntly. "Tell me." Adam looked around. Besides them, there were only two customers and the bartender in the bar. He pulled out his phone and, barely keeping his hands from trembling, opened the same video. "Look." The screen showed Nora sitting in a restaurant with a stranger and then them kissing. The video lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make everything clear without words. Josh, after watching the recording, exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry, buddy." Adam felt anger flare up in his chest again, but he quickly suppressed it, trying to speak in an even voice. "I want to know who this guy is, where he came from, and how long Nora has been dating him. Maybe they had such a dinner more than once. I need everything." Josh put his phone down and took a sip of his whiskey, habitually looking around as if he were assessing whether someone was listening to their conversation. "I'll take care of it. I'll get a couple of my guys involved and we'll carefully figure out what's what. But Adam, you must understand, we may stumble upon something you really don't like." "I don't like this anymore, Josh." Adam looked away so as not to give away how on edge he was. "But I can't live in ignorance. Can you start right now?" "Consider yourself already started." The detective put the glass on the table. "Email me a copy of the video and any trivia that might be helpful. When Nora left the house, especially often, how she explained her evening absences. Maybe you noticed that she began to wear different clothes or buy something new and unusual. The most important things are in the details." Adam nodded. "Fine. I have some thoughts on this matter. I'll sort everything out by date and send it to you." When they paid and left the bar, Adam suddenly felt an unusual sense of relief that he had finally decided to take this step. This may be just the beginning of the journey, but now he is not alone. Josh is a professional and a friend. He will not ask unnecessary questions, but will get down to business right away. "Call me as soon as you have news." Adam said goodbye, squeezing Josh's hand. "No problem. I'll let you know right away if anything comes up," assured the detective. Left in the silence of the night street, Adam got into the car and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror for a few seconds. The eyes spoke of sleepless nights and an excess of anxiety, but now they also showed determination. "Soon I will find out everything, and then she will regret that she took this path of lies." With that thought, He turned the ignition key and headed home, to an empty house in which Nora may already be fast asleep or pretending to be asleep to avoid conversation. About a week has passed since Adam gave Josh the videotape and all the details associated with the sudden appearance of an unknown man in Nora's life. Every day dragged on painfully long for Adam. He had difficulty falling asleep, and in the morning he woke up broken and angry, constantly thinking about what his wife was really doing. Nora behaved even more distantly, answering questions with short phrases or simply going to work. The day Josh called and said, "There's news, meet me in my office," Adam nearly dropped the phone in excitement. Previously, the detective tried not to take up unnecessary time, preferring to communicate in instant messengers, but here the voice clearly indicated it's a serious matter. Josh's office was in an old brick building that had once housed an insurance company. All that remains of its former luster are the peeling letters of the sign and cloudy windows. But inside it was quite cozy, a long corridor with soft carpet, several doors with signs. On one of them hung a sign Joshua Harper, private investigator. Adam walked into the reception room and saw a pretty young girl, Josh's assistant, Ellie. She nodded towards the door to the office, silently making it clear that it was okay to go through. It was a little gloomy inside. The only window was filled with gray skies, and Josh himself sat hunched over the table in the light of the desk lamp. There was seriousness on his face. "Measures, Adam," he said, without looking up from the folder with papers. "Have a seat." Adam carefully closed the door and sat down on the chair opposite. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to hear something truly terrible. "You intrigue me. What's happened?" he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I have information about the man we saw in the video," Josh said, raising his dark eyes to Adam. "His name is Zach Harrington. But the most unpleasant thing is that your wife has been dating him not just recently, but for several years." Adam felt his stomach tighten. "Several years?" he repeated mentally. He took a deep breath, clenching his hands into fists. "How? How did you find out?" he asked, swallowing a lump of approaching rage. Josh motioned Adam to the table and laid out photographs in front of him, black and white and color, some taken from a decent distance, but they clearly recognized Nora and the same Zach. And the dates on the photographs, written in small print in the corner, clearly indicated that the meetings did not take place in 1 month. At the first request to our database and through some connections, I was able to obtain information on his car, credit cards, and bank account. The detective began to explain. "Zach drives an expensive Mercedes, which, by the way, is registered not to him, but to a certain Ruby Harrington." Adam frowned. "So this Zach not only sleeps with my wife, but is also married?" "Yes, he's married," Josh confirmed, his mouth slightly curling into a cynical smile. "On Ruby Parker Harrington, the daughter of a large developer and owner of an entire chain of spa salons. In fact, she is very wealthy." Adam pursed his lips, involuntarily remembering. After all, Nora had never said anything specific about any wealthy acquaintances. But here they are, the bitter facts. Nora is in a long-term relationship on the side, and her lover, in turn, is married to a rich woman. And how did they manage to avoid getting caught for so long? Adam asked quietly, tapping his fingers on the table. Josh grinned. It appears that the meetings were rare but regular. They didn't go out to the same places. Cafes, hotels outside the city, sometimes, judging by cell phone billing, even short trips to a neighboring state for the weekend. Both were clearly trying to hide. Apparently, they had some kind of clear schedule, he added, tapping one of the photographs with the tip of his pen. In the photo, Nora and Zach were walking down a small street, holding hands. Apparently, they did not expect that someone was filming them. The expressions on their faces were relaxed and happy. Adam leaned back in his chair, feeling the blood begin to pulsate in his temples. It seemed to him that the whole world was collapsing, and he was falling into this black hole along with the fragments of his former life. Man, so what? It turns out that all these few years she has been telling me some nonsense. We talked about children, about the future. And at that time, she was dating that damn Zach. Josh. Buddy, I understand how painful it is to hear. But facts are stubborn things. I believe that Nora had her own version. Perhaps she was waiting for Zach to leave his wife. Or, on the contrary, she wanted to have an alternate airfield. I don't know all the details yet. I can say one thing. Their relationship is not like a fleeting romance. Man slamming his palm on the table in anger. Bitch. How could she take me for a fool all this time? Josh exhaled briefly, realizing that words of sympathy would not help much here. Listen, maybe you should talk to her directly. Say that you know everything. Adam shook his head, looking at the photographs. No, I don't want to make a scene yet. I can't. I need time to think. And damn, I need more information. If they have been dating for so long, it means there are still nuances that can be useful to me. For example, where they meet most often, in which hotel, what plans they have for the future. I don't want her to get out of it and justify herself with some ridiculous stories. Josh nods understandingly. Fine, I'll keep digging. If necessary, you can install outdoor surveillance and track its movements in more detail. GPS trackers, phone tracking. I know a couple of smart guys who can help. Man looking at the photos with disgust and pain. Do whatever you need to do. I just can't live this lie any longer. Josh flipped through a few pages in the folder and showed Adam a photo of a statuesque, middle-aged blonde dressed in an expensive designer outfit. This is Ruby, Zach's wife. Josh clarified. She owns several beauty salons and is from the famous Parker family. Also not the last person in society. Apparently, she still has no idea about her husband's infidelity, or at least does not attach importance to them. Adam pursed his lips. So this Zach is using her money and having a whirlwind affair with my wife. I wonder if he is some kind of gigolo. Not necessarily, Josh said carefully. Perhaps he also has his own goal or some other motives. But the fact remains, your wife and this guy have been together for a long time. Did she just want to live with me to hell? Adam smiled bitterly. We really talked about the future. She agreed, denied, but we were looking for compromises. Or was it just me? Josh remained silent, giving his friend time to digest what he had heard. He understood that saying something along the lines of "forget it and move on" would be the height of cynicism. Moreover, Adam may not want to just get a divorce at all. Sometimes people prefer to take revenge. Adam ran his hand over his face, feeling the stubble brush against his palm. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept for several nights. His eyes were red, either from lack of sleep or from suppressed rage. Josh, I have to ask you a favor, he finally said quietly. I want you not just to observe, but also to collect as much evidence as possible. Photos, receipts, evidence of meetings, chats, correspondence. Everything so that later, if necessary, I can present it in court or... He paused and then continued, clenching his fists. Or, if I decide otherwise, to use it against them. Josh looked up. Are you sure this is what you want? This is a road from which it will not be easy to turn off. Sure, Adam said confidently. I want to know everything, from start to finish. And if she betrayed me, then let her get what she deserves. Josh shrugged his shoulders. Okay, friend. Well, I do as you ask. I'll let you know when I have a complete package of information. He quickly made notes in his notebook, already mentally planning what resources to use. Adam thanked Josh and left the office. It was getting dark outside. The lanterns dimly illuminated the deserted street. The wind blew yellow leaves along the sidewalk. People hurried home, wrapping themselves up against the coolness, and Adam suddenly felt that he didn't want to go home at all. What will I tell her? That I had a rough day? Is everything okay? Why pretend now? He asked himself. It made him sick to think that Nora might be texting Zach right now, arranging to meet again, and all this is under his nose. Okay, baby. Now I won't sit idly by either, he thought bitterly. Do you think you can go around behind my back with impunity? Let's see who comes out the winner in the end. For the first time since what happened in the restaurant, Adam felt a strange surge of strength. Pain, jealousy, and anger melted into a clear determination to get to the bottom of the truth and take revenge. He understood this is just the beginning. Sitting in the car, not far from the front entrance of a luxurious house, Adam tried to calm down and collect his thoughts. Josh's words were spinning wildly in his head. Zach is married to Ruby Harrington. She has a whole chain of salons and an influential family. The detective found out both the address and some details about Ruby herself. It turned out that she was far from an ordinary housewife. Now Adam was planning to take a step that not every husband could decide to take when faced with his wife's betrayal. He was going to personally meet the wife of Nora's lover. For what? He asked himself. Because we are both deceived. Maybe together it will be easier for us to expose this couple and take revenge. Ruby Harrington's house, surrounded by a high wrought iron fence, looked almost like a luxurious mini palace. Manicured lawn, exquisite architecture, marble columns. Lanterns along the perimeter illuminated the path leading to the massive front door. Adam took a deep breath and got out of the car. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what to expect from this woman. Perhaps she won't even believe his words or simply won't want to talk about dirty laundry on the threshold of her luxurious mansion. But he had a trump card, a video, which clearly shows Zach kissing Nora. This is more than enough to destroy all illusions about the husband's fidelity. Climbing the wide stairs to the door, Adam pressed the bell button. Several agonizing seconds passed. A female voice came from the speaker. "Yes, who's there?" "My name is Adam. I need to speak with Mrs. Harrington regarding a very important matter concerning her husband," he said firmly, trying not to show his nervousness. Long pause. Then there was a heavy click, and the door opened slightly. Adam saw on the threshold a tall blonde in her early 30s, with impeccable makeup and an elegant lounge suit. There was a slight wariness in her gaze, but it was clear that she was a woman accustomed to carrying herself with dignity. "I'm Ruby Harrington. Excuse me, who are you?" she asked coldly. Adam River. "I have information about your husband." He plucked up courage and took a step forward, lowering his voice. "Perhaps what I say will shock you, but please listen to me." She looked at him appraisingly. It was clear that Ruby was suspicious of unexpected visits. However, something in Adam's face or in his intonation made her step aside and offer to enter the house. Ruby led him into a spacious living room with high ceilings. There were expensive furniture and pieces of art here, making the room look almost like a museum. Adam felt out of place. This place was too reminiscent of a luxurious showcase, where it is not customary to talk about such base things as betrayal. "Have a seat," the hostess suggested briefly, gesturing towards the leather chair. She sat down opposite her, crossing her legs. "Now, please explain what information about my husband means." Adam hesitated for a moment. How to approach such a conversation? But he wasn't here for small talk. "Mrs. Harrington, Ruby, yes." He decided to go straight to the name. "I think it would be better for you to see everything for yourself." With these words, Adam took out his phone and turned on the same video from the restaurant. Nora and Zach were clearly visible on the screen, sitting close to each other, smiling and, finally, kissing. It looked unmistakably intimate. It was hard to come up with any decent justification. Ruby looked at the recording silently. At first her eyes widened in amazement. Then her face darkened with anger, and at the end she covered her mouth with her hand, apparently trying to cope with the approaching emotions. When the video ended, she leaned back on the couch and exhaled heavily. "I knew he was cheating on me," she finally said, running her hand over her forehead. "But I didn't think that everything was so serious with him." Adam raised his eyebrows in confusion. "So you suspected that he had mistresses?" Ruby smiled bitterly. "Zach is a fan of showing off and having fun on the side. He always spent money left and right, and I, out of stupidity or pride, did not want to make it public. We quarreled many times, but it never came to a divorce. We have a common business, contracts with my parents." She paused, glaring at the photographs of her husband and Nora. "But lately I noticed that he began to disappear at night more often than usual. It seems that your wife is his long-term affair and not a fleeting connection, as he used to have. Hearing this, Adam felt a strange mixture of relief and pain. On the one hand, he is glad that he does not have to prove the obvious to Ruby. On the other hand, it's creepy to realize that Nora is far from Zach's only betrayal. Ruby took a few deep breaths, trying to regain her composure. Finally, she looked at Adam more confidently. Okay, I guess that sooner or later some other side of this scandal would find me. But I didn't think that. So, what are you planning to do now? Instead of answering, Adam ran his hand through his hair and looked up at her, full of determination. I'm not going to let Nora get away with this. She lied to me for years. And your husband is a scoundrel. He takes advantage of your trust and money. I think we could join forces. Ruby narrowed her eyes ironically. Union of deceived spouses? Sounds interesting. But what exactly do you propose to do? To be honest, I want to know all the details, Adam explained. If they have been dating for many years, then perhaps they have joint accounts, secret meeting places that both you and I have access to through the detective. We can gather enough evidence against them and then strike together. If we want, we will go to court. If we want, we will arrange a public shame for them. Everything is in our hands. Ruby listened intently, drumming her nails on the armrest of the sofa. She seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. Finally, she leaned forward a little. I've been wanting to put this bastard in his place for a long time, but getting a divorce and taking away part of the business is too easy and not that painful for him, and he deserves something more brutal. She said this with such cold fury that Adam flinched. He realized that this woman was capable of much if she was driven to despair. So we're uniting? He asked, trying to speak evenly, but already feeling the flame of revenge burning inside him. Yes, Adam, she nodded curtly. Consider us in the same boat. There was silence. There was a tense silence in the living room, broken only by the soft noise of the air conditioner. Sorry for listening to all this, Ruby finally said, wrapping her arms around herself. It's just that for me. Despite all the suspicions, it's still a shock to see my husband like this, with another woman, and realizing that this lasts for years is doubly worse. Adam nodded heavily. Believe me, I know this. Nora lied to me and at the same time continued to pretend that everything was fine with us. I thought that she was just tired of work, experiencing depression. But damn, in the end, everything turned out to be much worse. Ruby looked at him unexpectedly softly. You know, I could now say, let's just leave them, file for divorce, and move on with our lives. But her eyes sparkled with determination. I can't do that. Zach had been annoying me for a long time with his infidelities, and I tolerated them largely because of the business and the reputation of the family. But now that everything has been revealed, I want to do something so that he understands the vileness of his act. Honestly, I don't want to limit myself to just divorce either, Adam admitted. She signed her own death sentence. Ruby stood up from the couch, took a few steps around the living room, walked around the statue against the wall, something like a small copy of an ancient sculpture, and stopped at the window. The night lights of the city were reflected in her eyes, and a thin but sinister smile appeared on her face. I have resources and people who can help figure out all of Zach's financial flows, his contacts, and work connections. I can share information with your detective. I believe that together they will quickly unearth all the dirty details. Adam rose from his seat. Thank you, it will be appreciated. All I have now is what Josh, my detective friend whom I hired, managed to dig up. We can do real surveillance, track where they stay, how often they meet, with whom they communicate. And when we have all the evidence in our hands, he fell silent, allowing Ruby to continue her thoughts. She turned to face him. We'll hit them where it hurts the most. And then, if we want, we will make sure that they are left penniless and without reputation. Adam felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that Ruby was looking at this not just as a family drama, but as a serious war where any method was applicable, and it suited him. Great, he finally managed. Then we agreed. We'll keep in touch. I will give your phone number to the detective, and you and he will agree on what steps to take next." They exchanged contacts. Ruby handed him a business card simple, with her initials and number embossed in gold. Such a gesture indicated how seriously she took business. When Adam was about to leave, Ruby suddenly turned to him with a worried look. "Tell me, Adam, do you?" She stopped short, as if not daring to ask a question. "Are you sure that you want revenge and not just freedom from pain? Sometimes people take hasty steps and then regret it." His face became hard, almost stern. "I have already crossed the line where I can still forgive. And if Nora believes that you can easily live on two fronts, she is mistaken." Ruby nodded, as if sealing her decision. "In this case, we have a lot ahead of us." They said goodbye at the door, and Adam felt a strange sense of relief. He found an unexpected ally in Ruby, a woman who until recently seemed unapproachable and far from everyday dramas. And now they both stood on the verge of war against those who betrayed them. "I'll call you tomorrow," Adam promised, walking down the stairs. "I hope that by that time Josh will have already collected the next piece of information." "No problem. I, in turn, will contact my people." Stepping outside, Adam breathed in the fresh air, feeling as if a weight has been partially lifted from your shoulders. Of course, the pain of Nora's betrayal still burned inside him, but now he had a plan, a goal, and an ally who, it seemed, would stop at nothing too. "Nora and Zach, you have no idea what awaits you," he thought, getting behind the wheel and starting the car. A treacherous and cold-blooded game was planned ahead, the result of which was supposed to be retribution. And if Ruby's determination is to be believed, she and Adam will be merciless. After meeting with Ruby and agreeing on a joint revenge, Adam returned home in an elated, but at the same time gloomy mood. He had already decided that he would not rush to reveal his cards. Instead, he will structure the game so that Nora does not suspect anything until the last moment. The next day, Adam got up earlier than usual and prepared breakfast, a cheese omelet and freshly squeezed orange juice. When Nora, still sleepy-eyed, went out into the kitchen, she was greeted by the aroma of coffee and her husband's friendly smile. "Good morning, honey," he said as if nothing had happened. Oh, Nora was noticeably surprised. "You've been really busy this morning. Everything smells so delicious." Previously, such gestures had long disappeared from their daily lives. Nora herself stopped cooking anything, and Adam was tired at work and could not find the strength. Now he took up the frying pan with special zeal, not out of tenderness, but for a carefully thought-out reason. He wanted to return the image of a loving husband so that Nora would relax and stop suspecting that he knew something. "I think we should start our mornings together more often," Adam said, pushing the plate towards her. "Of course, I'm not a chef, but I tried." Nora smiled a little warmer than usual, but still looked at him strangely, as if trying to understand why such changes had suddenly occurred. Adam noticed a spark of wariness in her gaze, but she seemed determined not to dwell on it. Over the next week, Adam behaved like a caring and generous husband. He stopped at a jewelry store and chose an elegant bracelet with small diamonds. Then, at another boutique, he bought a luxurious scarf made of expensive fabric. When he gave them to Nora, she blinked in confusion. "Adam, what's the reason?" she asked, looking at the sparkling bracelet. "Do you really need a reason to please your beloved wife?" He answered with a charming smile. Inside, Adam was clenching with self-loathing. After all, before, he had really sincerely wanted to spoil Nora, but now these gifts served as a cold, calculating gesture. He saw Nora literally melt from such attention, and this convinced him that the plan was working. The culmination of the ideal image came on Friday evening, when Adam suddenly announced that he had booked a table at one of the best restaurants in the city. Previously, it was Nora who always pulled him to fashionable places, but now he seemed to have rediscovered his thirst for romance. "Maybe we can go somewhere," he said, as if by chance. "Otherwise, I have a feeling that we are stuck in a routine. Let's go back to how we had it in the beginning: dinner, wine, music." Nora froze for a moment, apparently turning over possible pitfalls in her head. But in the end, her face lit up with a smile. I don't mind. We haven't gone out together for a long time. Adam nodded, quietly clenching his fists under the table. It was important for him that she relax and think, everything is getting better, he didn't suspect anything. After all, in the meantime, Josh, together with Ruby's people, were actively digging into information about the meetings of Nora and Zach, their secret overnight stays in different hotels, and short trips out of town. Deep inside Adam harbored the thought that this peace of theirs would soon turn into a destructive storm. On the appointed evening, Adam arrived from work early, took wine, ordered a business-class taxi, everything to create an atmosphere of luxury. Nora, dressed in an elegant black dress, looked as if she herself did not fully believe what was happening. Still, over the past months, she has become accustomed to the coldness in relationships. "You are amazing today," Adam praised her when they went out to the car. "Thank you." Nora lowered her gaze, and Adam noticed a slight shadow of doubt in her eyes. "Are you sure you don't have any problems at work? You're acting so unexpectedly." "I left all the problems at work there," he answered with feigned ease. "Today, it's just the two of us." Nora smiled, but Adam sensed some kind of internal tension. Perhaps she was afraid that he had accidentally or intuitively guessed about her affair. But seeing his outward confidence, she apparently decided that nothing had been revealed yet. They arrived at a fancy restaurant with soft sofas and dim lighting. The waiters wore crisp white shirts and black bow ties, and the patrons were dressed to match the expensive venue. Adam ordered an appetizer, a main course, and a wine that pairs perfectly with the meat. Nora behaved calmly, even laughing at some of his jokes. She looked at him with a look that, as Adam could see, had long since disappeared from their lives. "You have no idea how grateful I am to you for this evening," she said, taking a sip of wine. "I already thought that we were completely distant, that everything—" "Don't talk nonsense," Adam smiled, trying to look truly touched. "We've been through so much. Sometimes it just happens that the routine drags on. But we're together, right?" Nora nodded and seemed to put all worries aside. Maybe she thought that her lover Zach shouldn't write so often, while her husband was suddenly showing so much attention. Adam noticed that she was staying away from the phone. She probably wanted to disguise her duplicity even more. Deep down, Adam felt disgusted. Everything he said and did was a lie, albeit in the name of truth and upcoming revenge. But now he only held himself tighter, knowing that this was the path to his goal. At some point in the evening, Nora gently touched his hand, and something close to the old feelings flashed in her eyes. Adam felt a strange pang in his heart. Memories of how happy they had once been popped up in his head. He knew that this was just a shadow of the past, and that the real Nora had long ago become different, deceitful, and insidious. "Sometimes I think we still have a chance," Nora said quietly, looking at Adam, as if trying to read his thoughts. Adam forced himself to smile and answer. "Of course there is," he said softly, barely containing his bitterness. "We're together, honey." And at that moment, he caught himself wanting to reveal the truth to her right now, to throw evidence in her face, to nail her betrayal to the wall. But he suppressed this impulse. It's not time yet. On the way home, Nora looked happier and more at peace than she had in months. She held Adam's arm and kept talking animatedly about her plans for the weekend, like going out into nature, having a picnic, or even a short hike. Adam played along with her mood. He agreed, nodded, and suggested ideas. He saw how the last remnants of suspicion disappeared in her. She probably managed to write to Zach that she's busy with her husband tonight, or had already decided that she could live for a while without unnecessary risks. When they entered the house, Nora noticeably reached out to him, as if wanting closeness that had not happened for a long time. Adam felt everything inside him shrink from contradiction. On the one hand, he was disgusted by her deceit, and on the other, it was difficult not to respond to long-forgotten caresses. However, he found it difficult to find the strength to tactfully refuse, citing fatigue after a hard week. Nora did not insist and went to the shower, and Adam remained in the living room. Sitting down on the sofa, he ran his hand over his face and sighed heavily. "I almost believed that we were happy again. How skillfully she plays the role of a loving wife, and I play the role of a loving husband. Only the truth is completely different. Several days have passed since the perfect evening that Adam arranged for Nora. All this time, he continued to maintain the image of a caring and naive husband, so that his wife would finally relax. At the same time, their plan for revenge with Ruby took on more and more clear outlines. The tireless detective Josh, working in tandem with Ruby's people, extracted new details about future meetings between Zach and Nora. And finally, the moment came when all the pieces of the puzzle began to fit into a single picture. Early in the morning, while Nora was still sleeping peacefully, Adam's phone vibrated. He quickly grabbed it so that the vibration wouldn't wake his wife and went into the other room. "I'm listening, Josh." Adam spoke in a whisper, closing the door so that Nora would not hear anything. "There is important news." The detective's quiet but cheerful voice sounded hasty. "They plan to meet late tomorrow evening at the Crystal Gardens Hotel. We managed to intercept a couple of messages and confirm their reservation for the number through friends. Looks like it won't just be dinner there, they'll most likely stay all night." Adam's heart sank with a caustic feeling of jealousy and anger. It was too easy to imagine what exactly Nora was going to do in that very hotel. But he immediately pulled himself together. "This is a chance." "Great, Josh. So this is what we have been waiting for. Confirmation of the exact place and time, right?" "Exactly. I have already contacted your partner, Ruby," the detective added with a slight grin. "She said she was ready to act at any moment. Thanks for keeping me updated." Adam ended the conversation, feeling the same determination to see everything through to the end beginning to boil in his blood. Today, he had to discuss the final details with Ruby and finally decide when and how they would hit the traitors. In the afternoon, Adam and Ruby met in a cozy cafe away from the crowded part of the city so that no one could accidentally see them together. They chose a table in the back of the room and pretended that it was a business meeting. Fortunately, they both looked quite formal. "So, good morning," Ruby began in a low voice. "How kind can it be," Adam answered with irony, "when we are discussing the betrayal of our other halves?" Ruby smiled wryly and pulled out a small tablet from her purse. Turning it on, she showed Adam the emails that Josh and her people had managed to obtain, short messages from Nora to Zach, as well as from Zach to the hotel manager. Everything there indicated that the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening, with a luxury room. "As you can see," she commented, "they are planning a beautiful night there. I don't know how your wife will explain this to you, but—" Adam pursed his lips. Yesterday, she was muttering something about an urgent trip for work to a neighboring city. She said that she supposedly had an agreement with some partners. Surely she has no doubt that I will swallow everything. Ruby looked away for a second, holding back her growing anger. "What do you think our final steps will be? I have a couple of ideas, but I want to hear your opinion." Adam frowned, remembering their shared plan. They have already discussed several times that they want to catch Nora and Zach at the most inopportune moment. However, now that it had actually become a reality, the very thought of this scene happening in real time angered him. "You see, Ruby, I want to not only catch them, but also humiliate them, make them feel trapped." "Agree," Ruby nodded. "After all, if you just enter the room and say, 'Oh, you,' they can dodge, argue, and beg. I would prefer something more sudden so that they have no chance to get out." She typed a few lines on her tablet, showing Adam a spreadsheet of people who could help, including the private security agency she'd hired for her personal safety. Essentially, they could provide a surprise in the room before Zach and Nora even had time to realize what was happening. "In my head, it looks like this," Ruby said in a whisper, leaning towards Adam. "Our assistants quietly enter the hotel under the guise of service staff or as guests on another floor. At the right moment, we give them a signal, and they burst into the room and grab Zach and Nora. And you and I will already be waiting, perhaps also wearing masks," Adam added, understanding the plan. "To intimidate them, to create a real shock. And in the end, take off the masks and show who is really behind this invasion." At the words mask, Ruby's eyes sparkled with a dangerous gleam. Yes, it sounds impressive, but be warned, we are moving into dangerous territory, she warned. There may be complications with the law. Adam clenched his teeth and said, I'm willing to take the risk. I want to make them regret everything. Ruby caught his eye and nodded. Fine. Then I will coordinate on my part. And you contact Josh, let his people also be on the backup. More witnesses means less risk that Zach will later file a complaint. Understood, Adam sighed, realizing what a storm they were going to create. Their meeting is tomorrow evening. We need to think through all the details, how we will get into the room, at what moment we will break in, so that they are definitely busy with each other. Ruby tossed her hair over her shoulder, smiling coldly. Oh, believe me, I have a great nose for when Zach is at his most vulnerable. They left the cafe an hour later, having finally agreed on the details. When Adam got into the car, Nora called him. Hi, darling. How are you? There were unusual notes of fun in her voice, apparently in anticipation of a business trip. Yes, everything is fine. Where are you? He asked, playing the role of an indifferent husband. Already in the office, preparing for tomorrow's trip. I need to meet a client out of town. Adam heard her clearly rehearsing her lie. The desire to rip off her mask right now flared up in his chest again, but he only squeezed out a smile. Good luck with your negotiations. If anything, call. Thank you, darling, Nora answered in a gentle voice and hung up the call. Tomorrow you yourself will regret these false words, Adam thought, putting his phone away. Adam spent the rest of the day working out details with Josh. The detective confirmed. The Crystal Gardens Hotel has a service entrance through which we can take a couple of our people. The administrator is also on my side, so there will be no problems with access to the floor. Great. We need to catch them red-handed when they are naked and without any way to escape, Adam said firmly. The more painful it is for them, the better. Are you sure you're ready for this? Josh asked, hinting at harsh consequences. Yes, no mercy, Josh, Adam repeated. Neither Ruby nor I have anything left to lose. According to Josh, he and his assistants will be nearby to monitor the security and, if anything happens, settle everything quietly. Officially, no one will call the police until Adam and Ruby decide how far they want to go. In the evening, returning home, Adam found Nora quietly packing her things into a small travel bag. She didn't even try to hide it particularly. Apparently, she was confident in her version of the business trip. Adam, I'll leave early tomorrow. We have a meeting with an investor. Perhaps I will return only at night and maybe in the morning if everything drags on, she said, straightening her hair and doing her best to feign calm. No problem, Adam nodded, trying not to show that rage was boiling inside him. Tell me if you need anything. Nora thanked him and went to the bathroom. Adam, taking advantage of the moment, sat down on the sofa and stared at one point. Tomorrow they, Nora and Zach, will get theirs. No matter how much he imagined this scene, bitterness remained inside after all. He still remembered how he loved Nora. But the Nora who was with him at the beginning of their relationship died, giving way to a narcissistic liar. Tomorrow everything will change, and there will be no turning back. He threw his head back on the back of the sofa, closing his eyes, trying to find at least a drop of peace. But there was no trace of calm, only the anticipation of those shots when they burst into the room, and Nora and Zach realized that this was the end of their secret love idyll. It was approaching midnight, and the corridors of the Crystal Gardens Hotel were in semi-darkness. The standby lamps barely illuminated the luxurious carpet runners. Only the echoing steps of rare guests and the quiet rustle of air conditioners could be clearly heard. In one of the rooms on the top floor, someone else's passion was flaring up. That's what Nora and Zach thought, sure that they had another secret night ahead of them. But behind the tightly closed door, they were already waiting for completely different scenery. Inside the spacious room, everything spoke of luxury. A wide bed with satin sheets, soft, dim lighting, a bottle of sparkling wine on the table. Zach and Nora were in a state of euphoria. They had finally escaped from household chores to spend time together, as they had done so many times before. Music played quietly in the background, drowning out the barely audible noise of the elevator behind the wall. "You are especially beautiful today," Zach said, running his hand over Nora's shoulders, who answered him with a flirtatious smile. "I want to forget about everything and just enjoy the moment," she whispered, not yet realizing that their moment was about to end. A second later, a loud noise was heard, the sound of hitting the door, and then the heavy crunch of a breaking lock. The door swung open, hitting the wall. They broke into the room, 6 people wearing masks. 2 were holding short batons in their hands. 2 more were with rubber backups for restraint, and in front of everyone was a tall man, apparently the leader in this group. Nora and Zach did not immediately understand what was happening. Taken by surprise, they jumped up, but did not have time to take a single step. The man who apparently commanded the detachment barked. "Stand still, don't move." The voice sounded muffled due to the thick mask, distorting the intonation, but clearly conveying aggression. Before Nora could even scream, 2 assistants had already pinned her against the wall, and 2 more had tied Zach's arms. He tried to break free, but was knocked down with unexpected force. The noise of falling furniture, the clinking of glasses, and muffled exclamations merged into a general roar. A few moments and Zach, breathing intermittently, found himself tied up on a chair. The ropes dug harshly into his wrists. The masked people were ominously silent, except for the main one, who occasionally whispered short orders. Nora, pressed against the wall, looked at this whole scene with eyes widened in horror. "What? What are you doing? We'll give you money," Zach burst out. He tried to speak confidently, but there was panic in his voice. "No money. You will remain silent," the detachment commander said dryly. Zach felt cold sweat running down his temple. The situation seemed completely inexplicable to him. Who are these people? What do they want? Why did they so confidently burst into this particular room? My heart was beating so loudly that the sound of blood echoed in my ears. Nora wanted to scream, demanding an explanation, but one of the raiders lightly pressed on her shoulder, making it clear, "Be silent, otherwise it will be worse." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw fragments of a broken glass on the floor, the reflection of a table lamp, and she understood that the forces were unequal. One after another, masked people began to search the room, checking to see if there were phones, weapons, or cameras there. They found Nora's bag and emptied all the contents from it. She tried to protest, but received only a sharp shout. "Quiet, don't move." Seeing this, Zach began to shake again, as if trying to free himself from his bonds, but the ropes held him tightly. He cast pleading glances at Nora, trying to somehow understand what was threatening them. "What the hell do you want?" He blurted out hoarsely. "Do you want to rob us? Who hired you?" The gang leader, or whatever he should be called, silently shook his head and leaned towards Zach. His eyes behind the slits of his mask sparkled with cold determination. "You allow yourself too much. And now we will show you what happens for such actions." Zach didn't understand what was meant, but he felt that the phrase carried a personal threat and not an abstract allusion to money or jewelry. At that moment, one of the masked assistants, a slightly shorter one with a knife on his belt, grabbed Zach by the hair, forcing him to throw his head back. "Tell me, how long have you been with this woman?" Boomed a distorted voice, clearly altered by some device or from a muffled mask. Once, Zach blinked, torn between fear and confusion. How did these people know such details? Why are they interested in a connection with Nora? "A long time ago," he said in a half-whisper. "But what does this have to do with it?" "Don't ask questions." The bandit barked, giving him a slap on the head. Nora, standing at a distance, was also terrified. The situation was shocking, not just robbery or extortion, but targeted aggression on their personal relationships. She tried to whisper or shout something, but every time the raider rudely stopped her. The leader of the group, as if satisfied that their victims were under complete control, waved his hand, signaling to ease his grip on Nora, but not to release her completely. He wanted her to see what was happening to Zach. "Did you think you could get away with it?" he asked insinuatingly. "Did you think no one would ever know about your secret meetings?" Nora's heartbeat echoed with pain somewhere in her chest. She began to guess that all this was not a simple accident, but planned revenge. But whose? "We didn't harm anyone." She tried to shout out, feeling the guard's palm pressing on her arm. "You're wrong," said the voice behind the mask coldly. "You betrayed those to whom you gave your word to be faithful, and now you have to answer for it." These words made the hairs on the back of Nora's neck stand on end. She looked at Zach and saw the same panicked horror in his eyes. There was a pause in the air. Because of the music still playing quietly in the room, the scene looked especially ridiculous. A luxurious room, romantic twilight, and in the center two people, tied up and trembling with fear, surrounded by a group of unknown people in masks. Zach finally couldn't stand it anymore. "Listen," he said, looking at the leader, "if my, family matters are behind this, we can agree on everything. There is no need to use violence. Before he could finish speaking, he received another poke. One of the bandits pulled Zach's phone out of his jacket and pointedly threw it on the floor so that it shattered into pieces. "Did you think you could buy it off?" The bandit muttered contemptuously. Late. Nora grabbed the edge of the table with her fingers, trying to somehow free herself, but to no avail. Tears welled up in my eyes from helplessness. The leader gave a command to his men, and they quickly examined the room. One of them approached Nora and began asking questions in a sharp tone. "Well, beauty, how long have you been tumbling behind your spouse's backs? A week? Month? Years?" Nora grabbed her lip with her teeth to keep from bursting into tears, but she still blurted out, "Yes, a long time ago." "So what? We didn't kill anyone. What were you waiting for?" "Thanks." The bandit chuckled and looked back at the leader. Apparently, they thought that the betrayal would go unnoticed. The fear-filled atmosphere became unbearable. Zach, tied up in a chair, lowered his head and muttered something about money and ransom, trying to persuade them to spare. Nora, pressed against the wall, stood in complete despair, thinking that it was all over. She didn't understand what their goals were or how far they were willing to go. Finally, the leader, apparently satisfied that the victims were broken morally, gave a sign to his assistants for a temporary respite. They let go of Nora a little, but did not let her move a single step. Zach remained tied up. "I think they already understand what their fault is," the leader said, pacing around the room. "The only question is what their punishment will be." Nora frantically looked from one raider to the other, ready to burst into tears. It seemed to her that all this was like some kind of creepy movie script, only happening in reality. And Zach seemed to have completely forgotten how to breathe normally. He was pale, his lips were trembling. "Maybe we should show them who started all this," one of the bandits asked quietly, looking at the leader. He turned around sharply, as if thinking for a moment. But then he shook his head. "It's too early. First let them get into it. Then they will see, and this will be worse than any threats." There was a cold mockery in his voice, and it was impossible to read his facial expression behind the slits of the mask. But both Nora and Zach understood one thing: something even tougher awaits them. While the raiders were counting their steps, Nora and Zach tried to cling to the faint hope. Maybe someone will hear the noise and call the police. Maybe the hotel security guard is already running to help. But the truth was that Crystal Gardens was considered a closed hotel, where people worked, bribed, or at least in shares, with those who started this whole action. There was almost no chance of sudden rescue from outside. Nora felt a pang in her chest with the realization that everything might have been professionally planned. And judging by the hints, their deceived spouses, Adam and Ruby, are involved in this. For the first time since the betrayal, she realized how much she had underestimated their possible response. Zach was shaking. He spoke a little louder, addressing the void. If Adam and Ruby are behind this, tell them that I agree to explain everything, give any money, just to." SHSH, the leader interrupted him. "You haven't realized yet, it's not about the money. The fact is that you crossed the line, and now you will have to pay for it under other laws." With these words, he leaned towards the tied Zach, and he grimaced, closing his eyes for a moment in fear. Nora and Zach were already in complete panic. They did not understand who exactly had carried out this terrible attack. It seemed that the raiders knew too much about their relationship and clearly came to take revenge for something that only those closest to them could know about. Zach, tied up on a chair, was feebly trying to negotiate for salvation, and Nora, squeezed in a corner, looked in despair first at Zach, then at the masked people. The leader of the group, closest to Zach, finally took a step back and slowly, with obvious dramatic intent, pulled the mask off his face. A short wave of silence swept through the room. Even the muted music could not drown out the shock that ran through Nora and Zach as they found out about this man. Adam. No, it can't be. Nora exhaled, struggling to believe her eyes. Damn, Adam, Zach whispered, turning even paler. Then one of the figures standing at the door did the same. A graceful hand removed the mask, revealing the face Ruby. Her calmness seemed almost unnatural in the current situation. The face retained cold-blooded determination, but the cold fire of hatred burned in the eyes. "Hello, dear," she said, looking at Zach. "Did you miss me?" The voice sounded without a single tremble, rather as a mockery of his helplessness. Both Nora and Zach froze like trapped animals. If before this they had little hope of a random robbery or blackmail, now everything fell into place. It was obvious to Nora that her own husband knows everything. Zach guessed that Ruby suspected his infidelities from the very beginning and prepared for defeat. What does that mean, Adam?" Nora spoke in a broken voice. "For what?" "For what?" said Adam, stepping heavily on every word. "Because you've been lying to me for years. Dear wife who hid her lover. You broke everything we had for this." He cast a contemptuous glance at Zach. Shackled with ropes, Zach barely moved, trying to gain at least a semblance of confidence. "Ruby, listen, you understand, everything can be explained. Let's talk." But Ruby looked at him as if he were an empty sound. She silently walked to the locker, pulled out the drawer, and, making sure that there was nothing dangerous there, briefly nodded to the masked people. "We don't have much time to talk, Zach. You have always been able to lie and dodge, but now I don't need your fairy tales." Zach gulped as he felt one of the masked faces approach him again, apparently intent on keeping him contained. Adam made a gesture with his hand, and the two assistants released Nora. She tried to run up to him, but Adam put his hand forward, making it clear that she should keep her distance. "Stay there," he said coldly. "However, you have nothing to lose." Nora stopped, not knowing what to do, her eyes darting between Adam and Zach. It was clear that she wanted to find at least some words of justification, but under her husband's intense gaze, they got stuck in her throat. "For a long time you pretended that our marriage was alive, and at the same time you had a long relationship with him, right?" Adam said with detached bitterness. "Congratulations, it's your choice." The tone of his voice became even harsher. "But now I'm officially announcing, I'm filing for divorce." Nora's eyes widened. It seems that she still hoped that everything could be fixed. But one look at Adam was enough to understand that he had already decided everything. "Man, please," she began, and at that moment Ruby abruptly interrupted her. "Keep your whining to yourself. You can even now admit that it was a mistake, but the train has left." She looked around the room, as if taking a short pause. "I'm also filing for divorce. Consider yourself free, Zach. You can live as you want, but you will lose all your money, business, and reputation. I'll take care of it." Zach paled even more. He already felt bad about Ruby's words, but when she mentioned money and reputation, he sank, realizing that she was not joking. Hearing these words, Nora leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, as if her strength had completely left her. Recently, she dreamed of a double life, where she would be with both her husband and her lover, but now everything has collapsed at once. The state of shock did not allow her to find a logical exit. "Is it possible?" Zach wheezed, looking at Ruby. "Is it possible somehow not to bring it to trial?" Ruby tilted her head to her shoulder. interrupting him with a dismissive wave of her hand. "No, you can't. I've put up with enough of your petty affairs already. It was not a secret to me, but this particular relationship of yours is long, humiliating for me. That's enough." She took a plump folder out of her pocket. "Here are the documents about the division of property, financial obligations, and application for divorce. I believe we will sort out the legal details through my lawyers." Zach didn't know what to answer. He realized that all the threads of control had fallen from his hands. He was literally tied up and even exposed. Adam and Ruby exchanged knowing glances. Then Adam turned his gaze to Nora, who seemed to be only now beginning to realize how hopeless the situation was. "Don't look at me like that, Nora," he said quietly, almost emotionlessly. "I loved you. We made plans. You yourself destroyed everything." She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth to keep from crying out loud, and yet the words came out. "Sorry, it's all gone too far." "Don't even start," Adam cut her off. "I don't want to see your tears. From now on, everything is decided. You will have to live with the consequences." At these words, he waved to his assistants, and they carefully but firmly led Nora out of the corner, placing her next to Zach. The Avenger spouses now looked down on them, making it clear that there was no room for equality here. A tense silence hung in the air. Ruby broke the silence, hissing with cold mockery. "Well, let's see how long your love lasts after tonight. I think that at this point, the story of your relationship will end, and only shame awaits you ahead." She turned to the masked people. "Untie them. Let them go wherever they want. But now we have all the evidence and all the rights to trample on them socially, financially, and emotionally." Hearing her words, the two bandits took out a knife and cut the ropes on Zach's hands. He was staggering. They helped him up, but his gaze remained dull. Nora stood nearby, sobbing, as if trying to figure out how they could get out of this room now, what step to take. Adam and Ruby watched this in silence, not hiding their contempt. When the ropes fell to the floor, Adam threw a folder of documents at Nora's feet. "Everything is here. An application for divorce, a list of property division, legal papers. You know where to apply." Nora knelt down, frantically picking up the folder, and felt completely humiliated. Everything for which she secretly lived with Zach turned into ruin in an instant. Adam made a sign to the masked people, and they moved towards the exit. Ruby hurried after them, but right at the door she turned around. "I hope you remember this lesson. Lawyers will contact you shortly. See you later, or better yet, goodbye." Adam stepped next, unable to look at Nora any longer. He tried to contain the storm of feelings, remembering all the happy moments of their past. But rage and disappointment prevailed. Before leaving, he said over his shoulder, "Oh yes, Nora, I don't want to see you in our house. You can pick up your things tomorrow." Neither she nor Zach could utter a word in response. Left in the destroyed room, they looked like two lost people who had lost the ground under their feet. Everything that seemed fascinating to them just yesterday has turned into a nightmare. Adam stood in the corridor of a luxury hotel, breathing heavily after the scene of his exposure. The satisfaction of revenge and the realization of how far he had gone were mixed inside him. Ruby had already left the room, knowing enough that they had kept their promise to put cheaters in their place. But this was not enough for Adam. Deep down, he wanted Nora to feel real hopelessness since she had ruined his life. He motioned to the masked man who was already waiting around the corner. He nodded, took out his phone, and called someone. A few moments later, they were approached, quietly walking on the soft carpet. 5 men, gloomy, with a heavy gaze, clearly not one of the respectable citizens. Adam saw them only once when he asked his friend Detective Josh for advice on where to find reliable thugs. According to unverified rumors, they were involved in various dark affairs, for which they had already been in prison. "They are there," Adam said briefly, nodding towards the number. The leader of this 5, a short, stocky man with a scar on his cheek, looked at Adam. "So, just go in and figure it out." Adam grew cold from his own thoughts, but still clenched his fists and answered, "Yes, Nora, she shouldn't feel safe. Do whatever you think is necessary, but without deadly consequences, okay? The leader nodded, and his accomplices moved towards the door. There was a short knock, and you could hear it swinging open again. Nora and Zack stood inside, stunned by their recent nightmare. They had not yet recovered from the humiliation and announcement of divorce, but froze when they saw a group of unfamiliar, ominous-looking men who began to walk inside. No, please, Nora burst out when she realized that these were no longer the same masked people who turned out to be Adam and Ruby. Zack glanced sideways at her, barely able to stand on his feet, but no one gave him a chance to intervene. 2 of the 5 stood next to him, and the rest stood at Nora herself. It seemed that something even more terrible was about to happen than they were simply tied up and intimidated. In the corridor, Adam nodded briefly to his assistant. "Turn off the lights in the hallway," he ordered. He pressed the general switch for this part of the upper floor. The lights had gone out, and only the emergency lamps dimly illuminated the space. Through the open door of the room, Adam saw Nora's frightened gaze for another moment, and then that light went out to someone inside the room turned it off, slamming the door. From behind her came the muffled rumble of a fallen object and a short scream. Adam felt a shiver run through his hands. He understood that he was partly overstepping the mark, but the thirst for revenge clouded his mind. Memories flashed in his head of how he found his wife cold and indifferent, how he saw her with Zack in a restaurant, how now she stood humiliated and begged for mercy, and he could not forget the betrayal. Turning around, Adam said quietly, "Let them untangle themselves. Let's go." He walked down the corridor to the elevator. Through the roar of blood in his ears, he still heard distant sounds from the room, but tried to tune them out. He made his move and made Nora understand that the consequences of betrayal would be bitter. Inside, my heart was squeezing with heavy bitterness from the fact that I had once loved this woman, and now I was watching her drown in the darkest abyss of their broken marriage. But the road back was already cut off. A few months later, Adam sat on the spacious terrace of a country house, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. The smell of freshly cut grass and the light aroma of expensive whiskey in his glass hung in the air. The wind pleasantly blew across his face, but a hurricane of feelings was still raging inside him. He achieved everything he wanted. Nora and Zack were destroyed. After that night at the hotel, Nora disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered. Her attempts to contact him were met with icy silence. Adam's lawyers dismantled their joint property, leaving her with virtually nothing. She had to move out of their house and return to the small apartment that she had rented before her marriage. It turned out that, without the financial support of her husband, her life began to rapidly collapse. She tried to find a job, but rumors about her double life had already spread throughout the city, leaving a stain of shame on her. As a result, she became just a cheap street girl of easy virtue. Zack lost everything. Ruby not only filed for divorce, but also exposed him to all her business partners. All his machinations and dirty deals were revealed thanks to her team. Everyone turned their backs on him, friends, colleagues, even his own family. He tried to escape, but his debts and legal proceedings made this impossible. The last time Adam heard from him, he was selling his expensive suits to pay for his lawyers. Ruby, on the other hand, thrived. Their vengeful alliance ended with mutual respect and even something resembling friendship. She knew that she acted harshly, but she didn't regret it one bit. Moreover, she looked even happier than before, free and confident. Adam finally allowed himself to exhale. He was destroyed by this revenge, but in a strange way, he felt relieved. He realized that he no longer loved Nora. The woman he once idolized has disappeared, and her place has been taken by a cunning liar. Now he knew the price of trust and betrayal. He took a sip of whiskey, looking into the distance. Life moved on, and he was ready for a new stage. Although there were still scars in his heart, he knew one thing: he would never allow anyone to do this to him again. Closing his eyes, he smiled. There was a new life ahead, without lies, without pain, without Nora. And that suited him completely. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.